crossed the 100 gigawatt mark this year, taking it to fourth rank globally in terms of total installed capacity. However, India's success story in renewable energy gets muddled because of its rapidly growing appetite for coal, which still fuels the bulk of India's power needs. Despite global criticism, India has been pushing ahead with ambitious plans to build more coal-fired power plants. The current temporary shortage of coal has driven the nation towards a looming power crisis and exposed in no unclear way our heavy dependence on this dirty fuel. That coal is disastrous for India's climate and public health is well established. Not only is it responsible for the biggest chunk of carbon dioxide emissions, burning coal also produces pollutants like mercury and sulfur dioxide, which wreak havoc on India's environment. Foreign athletes, diplomats, and world leaders dread visiting New Delhi during the polluted winter months. Local authorities routinely warn people from stepping outdoors as the air is too toxic for human consumption. Then why this commitment to coal? According to some experts, the affordability and abundance of coal make it indispensable for energy-starved India. Millions of Indians continue to depend on the coal sector for their livelihood. Still, many more depend on it for their domestic use. Even if India resolves to transition to cleaner sources of energy, such as wind or solar, it would take enormous political will and huge public and private investments and several decades to get there. Given the massive challenges, reliance on coal is going to remain the reality for India in the foreseeable future. This is reflected in the ongoing media debates. Most of the analysts and experts are focused on why the government failed to increase coal production. But what about India's commitment to the world under the Paris Climate Change Agreement? What about India's responsibility towards the health and well-being of its 1.3 billion citizens? And what about the right of millions of Indian children to play outdoor in fresh air? To understand India's coal dilemma, we have with us today a panel of eminent experts. Please allow me to welcome them to Argumentative Indians. We have with us Dr. Umesh Kulshrestha, Professor and Dean Professor and Dean of the School of Environmental Science at JNU. We have Kia Acharya, who's independent journalist with focus on environment and development issues. We have Lydia Powell, who's a distinguished fellow at ORF Center for Resource Management. And we have Abhay Raj Naik, who's environmental lawyer, activist, academic consultant, and co-founder at the Initiative for Climate Action. Welcome all of you to Argumentative Indians. So to kickstart, can I invite you, Dr. Kulshrestha? I want our audience and everybody to understand why this commitment to coal. Just to give some context, next month we have the Climate Change Convention at Glasgow in Scotland. And ahead of that, the IPCC, International Panel of Climate Change, has come out with a report which has some very dire predictions for India. According to their report, if the temperature rise is not controlled within the next 10 years, India faces things like heat waves, humid heat stress, droughts, forest fires, monsoon disruptions, cyclones, floods, cloud bursts, sea storms, and submerging of large coastal areas of India. So this is pretty scary. Then why this commitment to coal? Why is India going on expanding its coal, and why this public pressure on the government to increase the production of coal? Yes, sir, Dr. Kulshrestha, please.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you very much for inviting me on this panel to discuss this very important problem of coal, and also, putting all of us in a question of this century where the coal will be no more or we have to further survive on coal. To look back on the coal history, coal was started in somewhere 1880 around, and after that people were using coal for heating and later on industry purpose, and before that you should understand that this was a need to further take the campaign of industrial revolution, French Revolution, So the coal was a very good source and cheap source of energy people were using, and then people were enjoying it because it was cheap, and at the same time, a lot of products were manufactured using coal around several decades, almost uh, 50 or 60 years it took to understand the harmfulness of coal. But I tell you, there was a scientist called uh, uh, what called Swedish scientist who immediate after 10, 15 years of coal usage, he predicted. He was very visionary scientist, Arrhenius, and he predicted that the doubling of CO2 will have consequences, and around 8, 4 to 5 degree Kelvin temperature will go up, and that was only after few years of coal use. Nobody bothered because it was very good and cheap source. What was happening at the same time? Coal was very, very strong source of SO2. Some people reported acid rain, but that was also not seen. So both products of carbon as well as sulfur oxide, they were going into the air almost 50, 60 years. Around 1950, people were worried, policymakers also got worried, and accordingly, in 1972, Stockholm uh, mm, what do you call, convention happened, and we all are winding with that today. And the development what we had for carbon, acid rain, then climate change, ozone depletion, all they became part of all this convention. So coal has been a cheap source, a convenient source. At the same time, when people were working on coal, then developing countries also entered into this scenario of industry in the 80s. After that, India also started digging out, and now today we have reached almost 1 billion ton. Within 10 years, we have doubled the capacity of coal consumption. Around 700 million ton we produce, and 200 around we import. So, but it's still, it's not, coal is cheap source, it's a dirty source, but at the same time, our capacity is still very less compared to China. It was very less compared to US, but today we are second number because US has taken a lot of measures. China is still too high. So first and second number difference is too high. And we also have a lot of coal. So there is a indication that India should not immediately go for coal less, because this is also our cheap resource. If we take care of sulfur, if we take care of carbon and CO2 washing of coal, then there is no problem. But at the same time, there is a need of our that we have to switch over to clean energy. Every time it has happened that whenever the new technology has come, globe has opted. So this is the time we have to opt new technology, that is from coal to we depended on diesel, petrol, CNG, now solar. So this is the option now. Vehicle we will go with the batteries, and for power we have to go for solar. And the transition for solar is also not fully in our hand. We have to import many things from China only. Then the option left is minus coal. We have to go for nuclear and hydrogen. In hydrogen also there is one requirement of heat. So that also we have to think not by coal, by electrolysis, and for that we have to have nuclear power to supply. So this is something that India is now targeting with the all the objectives. And let me tell you, India has been very proactive country. In developing country, it has taken a lot of measures for mitigation of greenhouse gases emissions from coal, And India was the first country in 2012, it submitted, climate change report. So this is something, and with that proactiveness, India has all scope to switch over from coal, but maybe in 2-3 decades, because it's not switching over to jumping or stopping as a red light. No, you have to think, because there are equipment, there are workers, there are, say, multiple consequences. So you have to think of all socio-economic impacts, and then, but it is possible within by 2050, India can become coal-less country. These are.
Thank you, sir. Actually, so you brought up the 2050, by which a lot of people expect India should make a commitment to become carbon neutral. And in the upcoming conference in Glasgow, there is an expectation that India will come out with a clear commitment of by when it plans to go carbon neutral. India is one of the very few countries now which has not made a clear commitment on this. Let me invite Ms. Powell. Ma'am, if we continue to go on with coal, do you think with this we can meet the expectations of the global community on our emission targets, whether we decide 2050 or 2060? Do you think it would be possible for India to meet its obligations while still continuing its reliance on coal?
Thank you. By obligations, if you mean Paris Agreement, we are very close to meeting the energy-related commitments, as you might know. India is probably the only country among the G20 countries to meet the Paris Agreement targets, which is 33 to 35%. Can you hear me? Decrease in carbon intensity.
Background noise. There is some sharp background noise. Yeah, I think maybe from your mic.
Again, you can go to some other person.
Okay, sure. We'll get you back in a minute. Can we go on? Can I invite Ms. Acharya?
Yeah, sure. Yajur, thank you for inviting me. I'm wondering, are we going to speak just amongst ourselves? I hope we have participation of others to be able to discuss what we want to say. I remember you asked, the first question was, why does India keep on having coal in its mindset? Given that we have global commitments, given our condition of environment, etc. I think given the experience of what I've watched in the in environmental field here in India, I think one of the biggest problems we've had is conventional mindset. After that, there is a whole lot of riders that go along to why coal is still as prominent and continues to be given prominence in spite of whatever we go to COP26 and say, okay, to all the COPs that we have said. In the last decade, if you know, we've more than doubled, I think, our coal. We've got now a private sector which is under overcapacity. So that's the kind of coal we have. And I don't think it is totally correct to say that we have a shortage of coal. From what I understand, there is a lobby in it. Okay? There's one group that tells you there's enough, and there's another group with vested interests that tell you there is no coal, which is not true from what I have understood. So anything that we do that needs a change in mindset, we have to deal with interests that seem to come up in this country more than I have seen elsewhere. Okay, so I think there are divided interests, but even given that, you ask, can we reduce our dependence on coal? And I will say yes. I will say yes, but I will say there are riders to it. And we have to figure out how to handle these riders. The single biggest of one of them, in spite of whatever I'm going to say, is that we need political will. And I don't think that political will is a far away, out of reach concept. I have seen in other fields with this particular government, that have pushed things. So if they want to do something, they can do it, regardless of whatever lobbies you have, regardless of what interests are being crossed. So it can be done. It will take time, but it can be done. One of the things that we can do, you also mentioned that, was it Lydia who said that, India is one of the fewer countries who have managed to put out their commitments at the Paris, as per the Paris Agreement, and that we are very nearly, reaching it, etc. If you see in the field, it is true. Solar has really proliferated. It has multiplied from what we had, but there are operational problems that we still haven't tackled. We need storage systems if you want to feed it into the grid. We need battery improvement. So what is the point of going up onto public platforms and saying that we've reached 100 gigawatts or we've reached X gigawatts when we haven't learned how to dispense it, how to use it? Is a question that I want to ask. Are we paying enough attention? I think no. I know it's expensive, but as I say, if there is a political will, we can still do it. There are other fields in the last 5 years that I have seen where with political will, they have pushed things through. Okay. So it's not just going and saying that we've done this. It's to actually see that it's working in the field. There is no storage system. There is a lobby in the grid. I will come to lobbies later. They don't want to take. What do you do during peak seasons if you have, or even off-peak season? So I think that our dependence on coal obviously cannot be zero, but like everything else in the environmental field, I think it needs an integrated mix. You in agriculture, in conservation and everything, we have integrated mixes. I think we need that. So we need all our renewables. We need to figure out how to use them. And I think in India, decentralized systems, I know if I see all the documentation and I do all the reading, that access to electricity has reached nearly 95 or 97% of the population. There's just 3% left. But it's the quality of the access that's also in incredible play outside metro cities. Okay, and I know that decentralized systems can work in many, many places, and I know that you can work with the government with it. So, for instance, I'll just tell you, there is, it's an organization called Celco, and it's run by the Magsaysay Award winner Harish Hande. And I was just listening to them. They have gone and used solar energy, renewable energy, solar energy for their primarily healthcare centers. And they've roped in the government who has given them money. They've roped in they didn't rope in. Actually, the government came themselves, the district collector came themselves. They've got enough money. So if anybody is looking to see a system that is actually working, minus coal, we need to look at decentralized systems to figure out how best to work this out. It's no point having big figures, on paper. For journalists like me, if I go into the field, I'd like to see it actually working. I can leave that for now, but yes, we need to also decommission our old coal mines. Let's say over 25 years, we need to start. We'll save there itself. So there are things that we can do. The elephant in this particular room, and what I'd like to lay out for debate, is the question of tackling lobbies. There are various lobbies that are at work in various fields. What do we do to tackle them so that we can move forward? If you speak of coal, just your question itself will tell me that half the country hasn't understood the need or the environmental fallouts that are coming from thermal emissions. So it's also it's complicated, complex, but I think it can get done. and I will keep saying because I've seen it in other fields in the government. Just take the Aadhaar card, for instance. I'm just giving an example. My gosh, it's now like a primary card for identity, and it was controversial for so many years, but it got pushed. So if you want to do it, you really can. Thank you. I'll listen to the others, please.
When there's a will, there's a way. I want to understand more your point around lobbies, but we'll come back to that later. Let me bring in Mr. Nayak. I want to. So Ms. Acharya brought up the question of political will. So the coal, we can reduce our reliance on coal if there is political will. But what we are seeing right now is that a shortage in coal is resulting in so much criticism for the government. I mean, we all understand going away from dirty fuels to renewable fuels was always going to be painful. Energy transition is going to be painful, not just for India, for the whole world. But the question is, if this kind of power shortage or things like that, this is the first sign of a pain coming from energy transition. If the society is Indian society ready to take the pain of energy transition? Because the political will is always going to respond to the what the society wants, what the voter base wants. So sorry about the ramble, but the question is, do you think Indian society is ready for the energy transition to cleaner fuels?
Thanks, Yajur, and thanks for the opportunity. And I, of course, am very grateful to be in the company of erudite co-panelists here. Now, in response to your question, I do think the framing of the coal shortage itself needs to be questioned very much in terms of the larger political economy of coal production, consumption, and coal mining in India, right? And for me, I am a teacher of climate justice, and I'm, of course, an activist educator. And for me, the way I see it comes across rather starkly as the emperor has no clothes. So I do think the government hiding under a fig leaf of coal is not present enough, and therefore that has led to the shortage, and therefore we need to, in fact, deepen our production or import of coal, etc. is totally a rabbit hole that takes us away from what's really important when it comes to not just climate change and not just energy justice, but a much larger assemblage of issues broadly connected with people's connection with air and people's connection with land and water, right? So just 2 or 3 facts that I want to state out very, very clearly. One, despite sort of rhetoric that India is moving towards renewables and we are transitioning away from coal, the actual statistics will tell you that we are transitioning much deeper into coal, right? Over 69% of India's electricity generation is coming through coal. And if at all, and our energy growth pegged at a steady 4%, if not more, is largely going to be supplied also by coal, right? In the immediate aftermath of COVID, you see a multi-billion-dollar investment directly focused on auctioning of large swaths of land that actually are land that is inhabited by India's most quote-unquote marginalized or voiceless set of people, right? Our tribal communities who are constantly victim to all the dirty politics that we play, and forests, homes, etc., get auctioned off to private players for coal mining, right? Again, we continue to say a lot about how Indian people desperately need power, but if you actually look at the numbers, the largest consumers of this increased electricity output is not the domestic sector, it's not individual households, it's industry, right? Even as hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are energy starved in India, India is exporting electricity to other countries, right? So for me, the framing that, we are doing this for our people will struggle a lot, is a lot of bullshit, to be honest. What's really happening is an extractive state is feeding directly on its people, and is channeling the ancestral heritage of its people and of our non-human world to a neoliberal global economy, right? So in some sense, a hollowed out state as part of a larger coal assemblage, which is very, very global, is in some sense taking money, taking livelihoods, taking land away from the people. So I find it very ironic when people make the argument that can India and its people bear the transition away from coal, right? Because in fact, Indian people, or at least the armed janta, as we would have it, are the ones who, in some sense, are being fed upon by a small elite to really extract everything possible from the ground. I can say a lot more. I just wanted to also clarify all this rhetoric around we are meeting our Paris Agreement targets, etc. Right? Our Paris Agreement targets are our targets. The nationally determined contributions are nationally determined. If you look at the National Action Plan on Climate Change, it says absolutely zilch on moving away from coal. It says something about renewables. It says something about, in some sense, reducing the emission intensity of our GDP. It says something about increasing forest cover, but it does not say that we will move away from coal, right? Whereas science across the world is not just 10%, 20%, 30%, it's 100% certain that coal has to stay in the ground. And then when the second largest producer, consumer, and importer of coal says, yeah, but I'm not going to do that for 1 decade or 2 decades, it's very, very unlikely that any part of the urgency that the scientists are calling for in the next 8 years is going to be addressed, right? Because that's the nature of the climate puzzle. The minute China or India or the US or Germany stonewalls, we all sink in some senses. So for me, both from a perspective of international human rights law or international climate law, but also from a, I would say, a human rights reading of our constitution itself, it's not a pragmatic question of can India move away from coal? Will the numbers allow it? So we have to transition away from coal, right? And yeah, I think hopefully I've laid out enough provocation to open up some pot shots at me.
Thank you. I do want to dive deeper on the point you raised that the energy growth is growing mainly coming out of the industry. The growth for energy demand is coming mostly out of industry, and why and how important it is for the people, also for the economy and industry to grow. But before that, let's bring in Ms. Powell. As we discussed that India is being expected to come out with its obligation to the world. When will it get to net zero emissions? Do you think India is going to be facing pressure from other countries now that it is, along with China and Indonesia, maybe it is one of the very few countries still increasing its coal capacity when the whole world is shunning it? You're on mute, Ms. Powell.
I agree with the previous speaker that our Paris goals were set very low, and that is one of the main reasons why they were met. And the net zero target, it does not necessarily mean that we will get out of coal. One thing about net zero is that you remove carbon dioxide from the air so that you can use coal, but you use carbon capture and storage. So that does net zero does not really mean end of coal. And another thing I want to clarify is, if you take per person consumption of coal, top 12 countries, India is the 11th highest. Even Germany, United States, Korea, Japan have much higher, twice or thrice that of India in terms of per person coal consumption. And another reason which the other speakers didn't mention why we use coal, one of the policies that India has followed for the last 50, 60 years is self-reliance. It wanted to depend on resources that are available in the country. So since coal is a domestic resource, if you read the early plan documents, you will see that self-reliance is mentioned repeatedly in using coal, not just for power generation, but also for manufacturing fertilizer and so on. So it was for that reason that we continue to use coal. And another reason, which was also not emphasized by the other speakers, Indian per capita income, as you know, is just barely $2,000 per person. And electricity consumption is just barely, that is, you take the electricity consumption, divide it equally between all the people, 1.3 billion people, then you get about 1,000 kilowatt hour, which is still 1/3 of global average. So, and coal, if you look at the history, grid-based electricity is the main reason why electricity consumption increased in India. If you draw it graphically, you'll see that from 1970, electricity consumption increased per person and overall, mainly because of coal. So, and it's affordable. That's a very important point. You can say we can shift to solar, wind, etc. If you look at the cost of solar electricity plus storage, it's still much higher. If you look at Germany and California and other places where they have increased the share of renewables, the cost of electricity is much higher than the rest of Europe for Germany and the rest of United States for California. And this is an issue we have to think about, unless we can send the bill to Mr. Naik, of course. So economics is an issue that we have to think about. We can't ignore it. You know, at the moment, most of our distribution companies are running huge losses. The figures are nearly 20 billion or above that. That's mainly because we don't recover the cost of electricity supply, even with coal. How are we going to recover the cost of supply when we move into a cleaner, higher quality electricity supply? I think that these are questions we need to think about. The current coal crisis is not a coal supply crisis. It's just a shortage of coal stocks in the power plants. And that has reasons which, the technical reasons, logistical reasons. And one reason that is not talked about is that intermittency of renewables in Europe and in China and in India. Hydropower supply was much lower, wind power supply in Europe was much lower, and coal had to step in to make up for the loss. So these are technical issues. Coal is heavily dependable, whether it's morning, night, winter, summer, monsoon. And electricity, everybody wants on demand, 24 hours throughout the 365 days. This is what you call dispatchable capacity. And that capacity renewables do not have as yet. It's not because India doesn't know technology is available, it's known, but it's costly to adopt. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ms. Pavel. So it's actually, you made very important points, right? Affordability is obviously in question, but that's been changing. Renewables are getting cheaper and coal is clearly getting more expensive. And as less and less financing is available, that trend is probably likely to continue. But even if we forget about like India has a huge denominator, so per capita emissions of Indians is always going to remain low for very long because we have such a large denominator, and we can quarrel with the rest of the world in terms around how much is their obligation versus how much is our obligation and what we need to do and what we don't need to do. But the consequences are being faced by us. It's not like the consequences are happening elsewhere. We are right now we have some of the world's most polluted cities. It is us who's been told that you shouldn't go out for a morning walk because it's so hazardous for your health. And being in Delhi, I'm very accustomed to that. So then the question is, yes, we're looking at the cost of coal, which is cheap, but what about the cost of the healthcare that we would have to bear? We would have to foot the bill for the healthcare emergencies, which would be an inevitable consequence of rising pollution in India, and not even accounting for all the climate disasters that the IPCC report is predicting. Maybe we can start with Dr. Kulshrestha on this, get his view on that. You need to unmute, sir.
Yeah. So far, this air pollution is concerned, coal only cannot be blamed, especially in urban areas. I have been, working in this field, so I know, take for example, NCR. The major source of pollution, carbon, haze, has been adulteration in fuel, then plastic burning, open plastic burning, illegal plastic factories, pyrolysis, tire oil factories, and they are the major source of this soot carbon here. After 2018, when GRAP, graded action plan by CPCB, that was implemented, and also by EPCA, Environmental Protection Control Authority. I was also a member of that. So after 2018, you might have seen cleaner Delhi in terms of haze compared to, but not as clean as it was during 90s, when red line, blue line buses used to be there in Delhi, diesel driven. After that, flyover came, CNG bus came, metro came. Then again, cleaner air came. Later on, malpractices started, fuel adulteration, naphtha, kerosene. Then also, brick kiln. These all, we have thousands of brick kilns. These people started using tires in those. So that is the air pollution cause. But we put on the other side, like farmers, and that happens only few days, few weeks, but continuously it is happening, burning of plastic, PVC, when it burns, it emits lot of smoke, and especially during winters. And what happens, that is burnt here, but the pollution is taken away up to Bay of Bengal by the wind, because we have wind westerlies, and that pollution further goes to deep Indian Ocean up to ITCZ, and there it is globally mixed through Hadley cells or that metallurgy. So this is something you can clear cut. I have seen very clear cut hazy conditions over India, winds from China side. So clear cut, you can see that time. Now measures have been taken, things are improved. But if you go back 10, 20 years back, clear cut from aeroplane, you can see the difference in air near India and towards Europe. I have been, flying that time. So clear cut, this is the source of pollution, poor air quality, and we should not only blame to coal from that. But at the same time, I am not advocating that coal should not be blamed. Coal, we have to control coal emission, no doubt about it, because that is also true that we have very extreme weather conditions in Uttarakhand. Everywhere, we have floods in Rajasthan. We have, snowfall in Panchamati, Madhya Pradesh, few years back. So these all are, consequences due to change in atmospheric composition, and that has happened primarily due to fossil fuel. Fossil fuel includes both petroleum and coal. So coal, it because we have it, developing countries, they have a lot of coal. So this is also global politics, no doubt about it. But at the same time, we cannot have this dirty fuel. And so far control is concerned, take for example the locomotive, rail driven by coal. Do you see that rail now? No, because Where is a will, there is a way. That time government plan way, and all totally we have demolished that coal-driven trains. Now we have electric-driven, and that is where scope is there in the same fashion. We have to say bye-bye to the old technology and then opt for new one, and that is the advancement of globe, because we are not alone, we are not aloof, we are part of globe. So the way globe is driven, and we have to follow same. We cannot have our own different direction within same boat, you know. So that we have to understand, and with that equilibrium we have to move. And here comes the point of intelligence of politicians, how much they are having, you know, good advisors, foresightedness towards country, and the quality research which can guide them. So this is something like this kind of panel discussions. If things are coming out, notes should be taken, and then they should be taken to the COP 26. So this is something, the air quality concerns at the same time should not be forgotten, that in northern India we have loose soil, open soil. So that dusty conditions, they make particle in the air, and because of that we have bad air quality always, 95%, except monsoon and rain passes that. We have always poor air quality because of natural conditions also. So that is where I proposed to differentiate PM 2.5. Not only in that, we have to have PM 2.5 metal content, PM 2.5 pesticide content, PM 2.5 carbon content, and then natural fraction. Because as you say, health concern, we cannot address health concern only by saying PM 2.5, PM 10, because it's a composite having different types, useful and harmful both. So we have to differentiate those components and then report, make PM 2.5. Right now we have only one pollutant in criteria list. PM 2.5, if you differentiate, you make 4 type of PM 2.5 and then put into air quality model. That's why now air quality index is nothing. It's the only research item. It doesn't give any kind of advisory to the people, because it is failed to provide that. Air quality index was introduced to guide one day before or few hours before that person should go or not go, and that it failed. Now it is only a research item, because if you see all values, sometime PM 2.5 is reported more than PM 10. That is scientifically wrong. Similarly, the calibration of equipment is not properly done, and that time, if without properly done calibration, the reported values cannot be believed, and that they have no use in policy making. I have been part of EPCA many times, I have seen. So these are practical problems, and they affect both science and policy, and finally the public. Thank you.
No, Yaju, yeah, I'd like to ask a question.
I just wanted to make a quick observation. Thank you for clarifying the AQI, the weaknesses of some of these indices that we track, and you obviously highlighted a valid point about the Indian soil quality and how this factors into AQI. But I would just want to make a note that, look, we who have been born and raised in Delhi, we have seen the difference. The air quality, we don't need the indices and all. We can feel that it is much worse than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It keeps getting worse. And during when it's the bad days, you can feel it in your pain, in your throat. Actually, you can experience it when you are venturing out. So notwithstanding the data, and as you yourself said, the extreme climate events have already started happening. We are seeing monsoon already getting disrupted. So a lot of these things are happening. And now how much is coal contributing to it? We don't know, but coal is definitely contributing to 70% of India's power needs, and it is the dirtiest fuel around. So going back to the question of coal dependence and how much of that, as Mr. Naik brought up, that it's not necessarily that people are not willing for the energy transition. There are other interest areas. And I want to understand that a little bit more, as you earlier alluded, Ms. Acharya, if you could shed some more light on it.
So, sorry, what? Sorry. Can you just repeat that?
Yes, you had earlier alluded to the point, to the fact that we are very committed to coal, not just because people are not willing to move away, but there are other interest groups.
Yes.
We want to understand that a little bit more.
Well, as Abhiraj said, I think the largest consumer of coal power is industry. And I think that we have a very comfortable conjunction between industry and government. Unfortunately, it's not people and government. It should be, but it isn't. So there are lobbies at play. For instance, from what I've been reading and what goes around amongst journalists, we get stuff that is sent out. In the last 10 years, I think there is about 33% odd of coal power that is now in private hands, of which I don't know how much right now, but it's somewhere around a significant percentage is still not used. These guys now want to use. And part of the reason why you said, and we've been reading one set about it, there's the shortage of coal, is private interests wanting to bring this out as information, misinformation, disinformation, whatever you want to call it, ahead of the amendment for this Coal Bearing Area and Acquisition Act, which goes into what Abhiraj is talking about. So these are lobbies that are already playing. So when we go to COP and we talk, now we're talking about net zero. We have all these fancy catchphrases at these climate talks that we go to. Over the years, I've gone to several and now I've become cynical. I don't know what comes out of it. It just turns out to be like a huge talk shop. There are so many interests at play, not just us, not just India, but there is definitely an eastern, a north and a south interest at play out there. So what you go and say over there is really not, in my view, what we should be paying attention to. We should be paying attention to knowing that this is dirty. We got to do something about it. If we've got so many fellows, who are new and have got into coal mining and into coal mines, can we do something about that? If we could have sold off Air India after years and years, I mean, if you want to do something, I still feel you can do it. Miss Powell, can I call you Miss Powell or Lydia? I'm used to first names. Yeah, okay, Lydia. I want to ask you, you said that net zero can be achieved in India without worrying about coal. I'm absolutely intrigued. How do you think that will happen? What about the environmental fallouts from the use of coal? What about not just the emissions? What about the stuff that is going into the soil? What about the use of water when we don't even have any of that? And how do you say that we can reach net zero without worrying about the coal that we have?
Should I answer?
Sorry, I think I've gone in somewhere else, but it bothered me.
Should I answer that?
Yes,
I better ask the moderator.
No, please go ahead, Ms. Powell.
I'm not saying that. Even people who have come up with the concept of net zero know that fossil fuels, not just coal, will continue to be used, but the carbon dioxide which comes out will be captured and utilized for other purposes. That is the concept.
Itself is another controversial concept, but okay.
Yeah, let me clarify. It's not my idea. It's a accepted idea. Many people think that the carbon dioxide can be captured and used for other purposes. For a simple example is the Coke that you drink uses carbon dioxide. So, and other purposes, many other uses. Or it can be stored underground. That is the idea. That's why I said that.
Yeah, which was, people like Americans say it's incredibly expensive. It doesn't work for us. But anyway, that's digressing. I won't get into that part. What I'm trying to say is that each of these concepts and these phrases that come up they are loaded with so many riders that I don't think they work. I think the only thing that we really need to pay attention to and to focus is to figure out how to bring down fossil fuel, how to bring down coal for us.
May I?
Yeah.
In
Sorry.
fact, that is possible without means closing coal. We can have carbon zero emission, because net zero is something where you have to control CO2 emissions, and that many people don't know that India's CO2 emissions are not from coal or fossil fuel much. They are because of land use, land cover change. So we are having a lot of deforestation that is not able to capture CO2. So if we have more plantation, more this greenery, then we will be able to have more CO2 capture compared to CO2 emissions by coal. So this is possible, and that is the theory of that. And everywhere, but at the same time, CO2 you can control, but you cannot control the carbon particles. That is another problem, because carbon is absorbing aerosol, and that gives heating, positive radiative forcing. And because of that, you cannot ignore the particle emission. So you have to have control on coal uses.
And can you also shed some light on the clean coal? Because a lot of new coal plants which are coming in India, generally we are told that this is going to be using clean coal technology, which is not as bad. Does it really make a difference?
Clean coal means coal is having two major pollutants. One is fly ash, and other one is sulfur dioxide. So from that angle, if the coal content, fly ash content is less and less sulfur content, that is clean. And what we are doing, another thing, that we are washing the coal so that fly ash production comes less. So washing coal is good, but it uses a lot of water. We don't have that much water. So it's a kind of Akash ke gire or khajur mat ke. It's a kind of.
Very well put. Let me bring in Mr. Nayak. You were talking earlier about energy transition, and you said it's not for the people that we are still stuck with coal. It's the broader industry groups and other needs. But coal is deeply entrenched into our ecosystem. There are many states which largely rely on the revenues from coal industry, and millions of Indians, poor Indians, especially unskilled Indians, who are engaged in employment in the coal industry. How do you think there could possibly be a transition away from coal without having severe consequences, social consequences for these people, and economic consequences as well?
Thank you. See, I think I have no doubt that there are many people who are reliant on coal, right? And that is, in some sense, for me, an indisputable fact. Now, why these people are reliant on coal, and whether that reliance on coal is actually good for their own well-being or is good for quote unquote India's development, I think that is an immensely debatable area, right? So when we talk about coal, we sort of so far are sort of glossing over the fact that coal mining is incredibly violent in India. It's a violent process, right? It's not something that is just a scientific process. People are forcibly dispossessed of their lands. Policemen, sometimes paramilitary forces, are killing citizens, right? Environmental activists have been killed. India is a dangerous country for environmental activists. And the violence to the people is just the start of it. I mean, the violence to the forests, the violence to the biodiversity in the forest, the violence to the rivers, the violence to the earth in all its senses, all of that is a necessary part of the coal story. And without talking about the extractive, violent nature of coal mining, just talking about coal for me is a very simplistic and reductionist way of talking about it. Second, the people who work in coal mines are not actually doing decent work in India. They're not like having a decent job, right? They are, I mean, take what is called rat hole coal mining in Meghalaya, right? These are people sort of working against every known conception of decent work, from ILO standards to the Supreme Court judgments in India to the government of India's own declarations of what constitutes decent and human work, right? So any kind of pretense that people who are working in coal have something that is worth protecting, I think we need to sort of disrupt that narrative. We actually need to go and really bring in accountability to both private and governmental coal mining. And we need to, in some sense, ensure human rights for labor and workers in the coal industry, right? Now, can a transition away from coal occur in a way that doesn't mess up the life of people who are already suffering? I believe so, right? And if you look at, for example, the story of South Africa, right? Or in general, if you go to when countries are talking about let's build back greener, what are they saying? They're saying, let's find not just green jobs, let's find green and decent jobs, right? So let's find jobs. It could be installing solar equipment, or it could be, in some sense, even cleaning up the mess that coal mining has created, right? Regenerating the land. All of that is a job which could be paid for by money. And there are people who will benefit from that. So that's what I wanted to say in terms of how, for me, the framing is very important, right? With all due respect to Ms. Powell, I don't think the economics are presented as coal is a cheap source of energy, and therefore let's send the bill to Mr. Nayak. If he's willing to foot it, then we can consider moving away from coal. The real costs of coal, right, in some sense, what we call a negative externality, is passed away to the environment, or is taken away from future generations, right? And donut economics or ecological economics, any idea of economics which begins to acknowledge anything apart from a neoclassical predatory approach to nature will recognize that the economics of coal are not about coal being very affordable, right? The real reason why energy is either affordable or unaffordable is far more complex than that, right? Let's look at discoms in India. Let's look at how they are locked into power purchase agreements at the state level. Whether they like it or not, they are committed to buying lots and lots of coal-generated power for 2050 and beyond, right? Let's look at who makes money each time a coal field is auctioned or a plant is commissioned, right? There's an entire coal complex. Lots of people actually have their accounts go ching, ching, ching and make money out of that. So those are the real ways in which I would see the economics of it. And for me, moving people away from coal to something else is not a difficult challenge. I think it's a very easy challenge, right? And let's look at Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Orissa, Madhya Pradesh, coal-rich states. The money that comes from coal, right, what is called a district mineral fund, actually has some revenue which comes out of coal mining. That money is just lying there unspent, right? So these are the big elephants in the room that quite often people ignore. The money that is available for the development of that area is either unspent or is misappropriated or is wasted on mega infrastructure projects, right? How easy might it be to design something like, again, what South Africa's attempting to do, or what people are campaigning for in the context of South Africa? Millions of clean and decent jobs, cleaning the earth where we have polluted it, helping the transition to renewable energy, right? And without challenging this growth paradigm, right? We have to have this percentage degree of GDP growth, which in some sense is not going to the poor people of India, right? I mean, income inequality in India has just gone up, So while we might hide behind GDP growth requires it, let's not run away from the fact that the rich are getting much richer and the poor and rich gap in India has been expanding, right? So we are really stuck in our income inequality. So hiding behind GDP inequality requires it, or we need to bounce back, is also not an economic solution. I'm sorry, I've rambled all around. So coming back to the question, yes, 100% no doubt that there's more than enough to be done all over the country, which will provide a decent and a green job for people, right? But will someone say that, hey, that is worth doing? Or will we continue with our legacy ways of doing things, right? I mean, the minute you build a plant, you're locking it in for a long time. And I mean, the way things are going until 2050, Dr. Kulshrestha is right in some sense. I mean, from a pure scientific perspective, if I had to bet money on how things would end, he would be, I think, quite accurate, because the infrastructure is not going to disappear once it's commissioned, right? There's too much in place. Its viability will in some sense be rendered meaningless if you suddenly decommission it. So the moment is now to actually not commission new coal plants, to not auction new fields for coal mining, to actually focus on increasing efficiency within the system, even to stop wasteful uses of energy, right? I mean, we talk Gandhi this, Gandhi that. I mean, where is the energy Swaraj and sort of voluntary simplicity in this country? That might be another option to reduce coal usage or coal dependence. Sorry, I got a bit emotional and carried away, of course.
You know, Yaju.
Thank you. Yes, please, Mr. Har. Yes, please.
So I wanted to tell you, you say that most people are still looking at coal. You know, I had said earlier, I think it's a conventional mindset. We have a conventional mindset in India that's at play. I've seen it in environment, as I said. You know, I've seen in the villages, they're not worried whether the energy is coming from coal or from X or Y. They want it. Okay, so if solar is going to give them power and it's cheaper than them having to pay for the grid, they're ready to use it. It's working as an economic model in various areas. So
Jobs are not.
I don't know about livelihoods. Livelihoods is for those in the mines, okay, which he says it's a disorganized sector, really. That's a different question. But the use of coal, it's a very metro area question.
Like India is doing really well in terms of increasing its renewable capacity. But at the same time, it's still very small. It's only 14% of the overall power capacity. So any drastic reduction in coal, because the overall energy need is increasing.
We can't do it drastically, but we have to do it. We can take at least 20 years, 30 years. We've gone and said by 2050, we'll do X and we'll do Y and we'll do Z. But
my question was, are we willing to live with the power cuts? Because that seems like a likely scenario. Are we willing to accept the power cuts?
If you explain to people, you know, to conserve because we have power cuts, because of whatever X, Y, Z, it's also a lot to do with awareness. I think the media needs to play a bigger part in explaining. It hasn't happened. Okay, in the years that I've been here, it's true there were about 3 or 4 of us who had begun talking about environment. Now there are plenty, but I don't know whether that is helping because anyway, that's another issue. I'll digress if I tell you about the state of the media, but doesn't matter. We need to tell people why, and I'm quite sure they'll go on switching off their fans and their lights, etc. If you give them another source, or if you tell them for 2 hours, don't do without, if they can understand the reasons why you do it. Anyway, it's a very rich thing. We are the ones who will put on all our ACs, etc. I've seen Delhi, you go from AC to AC to AC, you can't live otherwise.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Yeah, I'm in Bangalore, I don't even need a fan, so it's okay.
That's why you are supportive of the accepting power cuts. So let me bring in Ms. Pavel. Ms. Pavel, Mr. Naik just obviously brought up a lot of important points, but one thing he brought up was the question of stranded assets. We are making new coal plants now, and these are most likely to become stranded assets in future. Is this a prudent strategy, or are we being short-sighted here?
Ms. Acharya mentioned overcapacity in coal-based generation. Most of the coal plants in India are less than 15 years old. That is because most were built between 2005 and 2010. At that time, it was believed that the demand for power will grow at about 8% and so on. And that is why the private sector stepped in and increased capacity. Demand for electricity hasn't materialized to the extent they expected, that is 8% per annum. And that is one of the reasons many power plants are stranded today. So I would say it's an economic growth question. If demand for electricity doesn't grow, even renewable power, for example, most of the capacity is not used. There's 100 gigawatts, but it's not used because unless demand for power grows, electricity generated cannot be used. And most of the renewable generation is at a time when demand for power plateaus, not when it peaks. So these are technical issues. So I would say stranded power plants will happen if demand for power doesn't grow to the extent expected. Most of the private investors invested thinking that demand for power will go through the roof, which didn't happen. And that again is blamed on the government because electricity demand projections that were made on the assumption that GDP will grow at 8%, 9%, projected huge demand growth for electricity. So I won't say that coal-based power plants were built just because we wanted to pollute. It was built because they expected demand for electricity to grow substantially. I don't think coal plants that are in the pipeline, about 20 to 25 gigawatts, will be stranded in the future, especially looking at the scenario today. Just 1% increase in plant load factor of thermal power plants can increase demand for power and for coal. That's what we are witnessing right now. So I feel an additional capacity of 20 to 25 gigawatts will not become stranded if electricity demand grows. Another one point that I wanted to clarify, which Mr. Umesh made several times, I think we are mixing up local pollution and carbon emissions. They are two different things. Global carbon emissions and domestic pollution are two different things. Coal plants produce, like Mr. Umesh pointed out, fly ash and sulfur dioxide. These two can be controlled very easily with off-the-shelf technology. But again, this is not being used by many old power plants because the costs cannot be passed through to the consumer. That is the main reason they are not used. Technology is very simple and can be used. So I feel just brushing aside the issue of economics is not practical, I would say. If it can be swept aside as easily as many people think they can be, we can do it tomorrow. I think economics is a very important issue, and we can't talk about social issues to cover the economic issues. I think I'd stop there.
Just to clarify, I just wanted to get one clarification, and we'll come to you, Ms. Naik. From Ms. Powell, you said the electricity demand has not been going up as much as expected by the government. So if it's a manageable demand, why doesn't the government try to address the growth in demand with renewables as opposed to coal? Why are we, and the economics wise, isn't the cost of renewables going down steadily for a long time? So going forward, if the cost goes down further and coal, like we are seeing, is going up, does it not alter the economics, and would that ultimately mean shutting down the coal plants and having stranded assets?
See, one technical problem with the renewables is the intermittency. You can't depend on it 24 hours of the day. Solar will generate only when the sun is there, and wind will generate only when the wind is blowing. So you need to have backup storage. Either you have to have backup coal plants, which step in when renewable doesn't generate, or gas plants like they have in Germany and other places. And this is an additional cost for renewables. So to say that renewables is cheaper is not completely true. most of the media, they use this figure called levelized cost of electricity, LCOE, which doesn't take into account the cost of storage. So if you, or backup, whatever you want to call it, if you add that cost, renewables is expensive. And you can look at the electricity tariff in Germany to see that it's true. And currently, India is prioritizing renewable energy. You know, there is a must-run status for renewable energy, which means when renewable is available, distribution companies must buy only renewable energy. That is the must-run status. And because of this must-run status, during the COVID shutdown, you can see that the share of renewables increased dramatically, mainly because of policy-driven priority for renewables. Renewables has a number of priorities. They have special access to transmission lines, interstate transmission lines. They don't have to pay for it and so on. So a lot of priorities given, without which renewables would not have grown to the extent it has. Coal is the main backup for us today. It is ramping up and down. When renewables slows down, it is the coal plants which are ramping up and down. And this is a wear and tear issue for the coal plants because they are constantly increased in capacity and decreased depending on renewable generation. There is wear and tear. And there are calculations that this has increased the electricity tariff because coal is acting as a backup. So to read in the media that solar is cheap is, I would say, it ignores a lot of technical issues. And
Understood.
The government of India is pushing renewables to the extent possible.
Got it. Ms. Naik, please.
No, it was Dr. Kulshrestha who wanted to actually.
I just wanted to say that the solar is okay. It's a good, and we have a lot of very high targets for that. I also advocate for solar, but when I did research, I found that none of the raw materials available in India. We have to bank on China, 80% for that. And we should not forget that production of solar panel or 4 modules of that set, that also require coal power to produce. So without coal, production of solar power in China, that's why China, you know, is the biggest market to supply solar power devices. And China's coal consumption is almost 4 times from India.
I think we have to stop looking at China, Professor Kulshrestha. You know, all the time in every debate, in every field, I keep hearing about China. We forget about them. Let's fix our own
You
problems
cannot
first.
forget, madam, because we are buying solar panel from there. Our solar panels are coming from there, and we will depend for centuries for that. We don't have raw material.
The prices are coming down. The prices are coming down.
So what? After 20 years, your panel get, you know, you have to abandon, and then China says the rate now I will not give, like Gmail.
So by
now
that time,
Gmail,
we need to.
now
All
Gmail
this
says
is
you
policy
pay and
planning.
then use.
Whatever you are telling me is policy planning. By that time, we really need to be smart about our own photovoltaic.
Exactly. Now we are going for that, and nuclear and hydrogen is the best for India. We have local sources, resources, minerals. So the whole problem, even wind minerals we don't have. Wind require a lot of rare earth metals. We don't have that. So that is the problem. People don't know. Those who are doing business, I encountered with those people, like this panel discussion. I had another debate, and then I came to know most of these solar panel companies, they are doing trading, not the manufacturing. So, this is not the topic of this debate.
Solar, if that is the case, no, I'll just give you an example of reality. Your own washing machine, half your stuff is from China in there.
Yes.
So we can't keep saying that. Okay, we will start building our own.
So just
to
make a point,
policy that I'm saying. We have to have a will to do it.
I think what Dr. Kulshrestha is trying to emphasize is that the energy needs of a nation are very closely linked to the national security. So to become so dependent on one country for our energy needs could be problematic down the line if China were to put an embargo on us to provide solar panels, and we need to replace our solar panels, and we do not have alternate sources of energy, that could land us into a lot of trouble. Coal serves as a backup because we have abundant coal inside our country.
And
If
by
that, if I
the time,
summarize,
moreover, you don't have coal, so you cannot start your, gas, LPG, and angithi or this stove. What will you
while we
do?
have you, Dr. I want you to elaborate a little bit more on the point about hydrogen. There has been a lot of discussion recently about hydrogen. Every few years, we have this excitement around hydrogen, that how it could sort of be the future of India and how it could do wonders for India. Can you elaborate what is the promise of hydrogen for India?
Hydrogen gas we can produce, everywhere. It's you can just dissociate water, it gives hydrogen. And if you want to heat, you require either coal or through electrolysis. So there is one option. Instead of using coal for breaking down the molecule, you require nuclear energy to heat it. Through electrolysis you can find. So this is the way. And there are some rare earth metals and other metals which are not available, but at the most we have almost domestic resources like nuclear power. We have thorium based nuclear power system. You can have that. Already trials are going on, and successful trials are happening.
Let me also bring in Ms. Powell on that.
Yeah, I just want to elaborate on a point made just now. Hydrogen is an energy carrier like electricity. It's an energy carrier, not a primary source of energy, which means you need another primary source of energy to produce hydrogen. Right now in the world, you produce hydrogen using fossil fuels, primarily natural gas.
Exactly.
But I think, as Professor Kshetra mentioned, you need another source of energy.
Nuclear.
And transporting hydrogen is a very expensive proposition. Again, cost is an issue. It's first of all the source from which you generate hydrogen. That has to be green.
Let me add another aspect which nobody touched that. That is, nothing is moving with your choice. It should be very clear. If OECD countries, they have developed some device, policies will be accordingly modified in other countries. You have to buy it. There is no other way. You have to go for different treaties, bargainings, and these kind of all processes. There is no way for any government, whether this or that government. Only thing what you can do, you can understand and make visionary approach, involve people like this panelist, and then you can have some kind of way forward. But 100% there is no escaping of that kind of strategy.
Thank you. Ms. Powell, so you had earlier highlighted a limitation of renewables, the transitory nature of renewable energy, and how you have these intermittent periods where it's not available. Do you think hydrogen would solve that? And that is why India has so much promises on hydrogen, because that energy from renewables can be stored in hydrogen. And if we can figure out a less expensive way of transporting hydrogen, it could solve India's energy needs to some extent.
Yes, I think hydrogen can solve this. It can store energy. It is like a battery. So using hydrogen to store renewable electricity is a technical option, and India should pursue. In fact, India had a hydrogen mission about 20 years ago, and a lot of money was invested, but it fizzled out. They had a target to produce so many cubic meters of hydrogen and so on, but it fizzled out. They should revive it. There are many qualified people who know the subject very well, and they should revive it. And I think hydrogen is an area which is still available for India. For example, renewable energy, like Professor Kshetra mentioned, China and many other countries dominate the entire value chain, that from the mining of the rare earths that are required, the technology, they dominate. And for India to enter into that value chain is very difficult, whereas hydrogen is relatively new. It will give us a competitive advantage if you continue to continue the commitment and not drop it like it happened last time. Definitely, its costs can come down with technology. I think technology is the answer. Continued dependence on technology, and India should try to become a technology producer, not a technology consumer. For example, in solar, we have become a consumer of technologies. In hydrogen, we can become a technology producer. There is an opportunity. It can store energy, it can transport energy. It's a versatile fuel, yes.
Thank you. So moving back to the topic of energy transition, which I think all of us agree that we have to transition, whether the solution, moving away from coal, whether it's going to be solar, nuclear, using hydrogen, whatever is, or some combination of all of that. I think the transition, we all agree, and that we may vary in terms of how soon India can do that, but we all agree on the transition. So I want to just for the conclusion, I want to share all of you to share like a brief comment on what do you recommend in terms of how India can make this transition. We'll start with you, Mr. Naik.
Thank you. So maybe just 2 or 3 very quick points here. I think most importantly, India needs to take a proactive and authentic role in charting its energy future, right? In some sense, India can't be just a follower. And even if you track India's sort of negotiating history, right? I mean, Paris Agreement is seen in the general conversation as a wow moment. For India, it was a huge negotiating loss. In a sense, it was a move away from earlier targets for the developed world and options for countries, including India, to a very pledge-based system that the Japanese had suggested a long time back. And my overall feel, see, I am respectful to the position that what India does with its energy, with its coal, can't be dictated by a Germany, by a US, by a UK, or even by the World Bank or the United Nations, right? In some sense, there is solid power in the position that our per capita emission or our total historical contribution to the emissions is tremendously low, right? And we must respect that. So in some sense, that is an important point. And therefore, in some sense, I do have sympathy with many people who are making an argument that India should have its share of the carbon pie, etc., etc. To the extent that I don't think anyone else can point fingers at India and say, do this or do that. Now, with that said, I think to be an honest country, I mean, we say Satyameva Jayate and all of that. The honest truth is India has huge income inequality, huge energy inequality, and has huge costs on the environment as a result of an extractive coal industry. And so sort of saying that our per capita emissions are low, or this is what an accountant will say in terms of an Excel sheet, can't hide that reality that will see you in the face when you go out and take a walk around your home, or go to the nearest coal-powered thermal plant and actually see what's happening there in terms of its effects on the land, right? So I think that requires a very authentic and local response. And unfortunately, we just have no capacity in our climate planning, in our energy planning. I mean, if you look at the International Energy Association's special report of 2021 on India, we have the widest range of energy futures available, right? Half of our, more than half of our urban spaces where our populations are going to live are not yet built. A large percentage of the vehicles and appliances that people are going to be using in the next few years are not yet purchased, right? So the moment is now, but unfortunately, everyone is either saying this is how we've always done it, so we'll continue, or everyone's getting chauvinistic and saying, who are you to tell us? We will, in some sense, extract our resources and and allow, I mean, what Indira Gandhi said, it's a curious irony, right? What Indira Gandhi said many years back gets replayed in so many different registers by both BJP and Congress governments. Basically, we care for the environment, but please don't tell us how to use our resources, because poverty is our biggest enemy. Whereas, as I've said, in reality, it is not poverty that is being addressed by our current usage of coal, right? It is lots of other interests are being satisfied. So the transition has to happen through open, transparent discussion, such as this. I mean, just look at India's nationally determined contributions process. It's all happening in some closed rooms, GIZ consultants, I dare say ORF personnel, right? It's not in our newspapers. It's our public folks are not present there. And this should be participatory. In fact, the Paris Agreement, the law on the matter, says that these should be participatory processes. The Supreme Court says it should be participatory. Supreme Court of India. The Constitution of India says that our policies and how we use our resources should be determined with our democracy. But in reality, these are elite captured processes happening away from the public gaze. So I think the real solution is to bring in that transparency, right? Even to translate the environment impact assessment rules to local languages, the government of India says, oh, it's too difficult, right? That is just like absurd. It's too difficult for the government of India to translate its law in the language that people will understand, right? So I really sometimes think we need to call out the arrogance of the power brokers, including the government, and really bring back the discussion to an open public space where it can be debated, right? And I, as I said, I have full sympathy that India needs its authentic position. We can't be pushed into a corner by Western powers. Yeah, thank you.
In all other comments too, but thank you for emphasizing that more transparency is needed in policy making. Let's bring Ms. Acharya.
Okay, you want concluding comments, is it? Remarks? Yeah. Well,
Yeah. What do you?
It's more or less what I've. Yeah, it's more or less what I've said. That I think we need to. Yes, as we said, we agreed. We need to. I think we need to sit. We, as in not just the government, like he says, participatory, whatever, and we need to put down a policy for transitioning, for cleaning up what we now have, minimizing environmental fallouts, cleaning up our transmission and distribution in the coal, etc., working towards a decent integrated mix. We have to do it. We decentralize where possible so that the government of India is not sitting in some village somewhere on the Garo Hills and saying, I'll give you the coal. So I think we can do it. As I keep saying, it needs political will, it needs push. And I think it needs also awareness from groups that will also push authorities to take a stand on the matter. Forget about lobbies. To ride over the lobbies.
More public awareness and willpower on the part of the government is needed. Ms. Powell, can I ask you, how do you think India can end its reliance on coal?
Thank you. I don't think that should be an objective. Ending reliance on coal could be an objective. I think it will happen on its own if the economics of our alternative sources of energy become stable and competitive. It will vanish on its own, like many other sources of energy which vanished in the past. I think the goal should be enhancing the quality of life for everybody. I think that should be the goal. Shared prosperity. I think Bangladesh has brought out that point in the COP26 negotiation. I feel shared prosperity should be the goal. And India and many poor countries have the unique challenge of trying to industrialize while we are also decarbonizing. It's a unique challenge. No other country has gone through that. most countries industrialized using coal, and their peak coal was achieved when their per person income was about $10,000, $10,000 to $15,000. India's has to achieve that at an income of $2,000, which is a tremendous challenge. So I would say focus, don't be technology specific. Just focus on technologies that will reduce pollution and emission, whatever it may be. Don't pick on anything because that may not work out the way you want. Just focus on technologies that reduce local pollution and global emission of carbon and other greenhouse gases, and have the goal as in enhancing the quality of life for everybody, not just a few. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Dr. Kurukshetra.
I would say that we are part of globe, so the global reports we have to respect them, like IPCC 21. It has highlighted that human interventions, human activities are creating global warming, and mostly that is done by fossil fuel, petroleum and coal. So coal cannot be left alone without blame. So this is one thing, we have to control coal emissions. At the same time, we have to opt for new renewable energies, and best way to go for that is in this have very heavy investment for nuclear and hydrogen energy, because that is the ultimate. Because the thing is that for energy we have to have foresightedness for 50 years, considering our economics and security. With these words, I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you actually for bringing your very diverse viewpoints and very enlightening insights. This has been a very illuminating session for me. Thanks to all of you for coming to Argumentative Indians, and we hope to have you with us again in future. Namaskar.
Thank you.